Perfect. So good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining us this morning for Pasta Publication. We're excited to be here today with Dr. Hutchins and Dr. Kogut. Thank you both for joining us. And for those who are new, Pasta Publication is a virtual event hosted by the Center for Research and Development in Dual Language and Literacy Acquisition, the ELRC Education Outreach, and the Graduate Student Advisory Council on everything graduates need to know regarding writing, publishing, research, grants, and the graduate experience. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat throughout the presentation, and these questions will be answered at the end of the session during our Q&A and discussion. And then with that, I would like to briefly introduce our speakers today, Dr. Hutchins and Dr. Kogut. So Dr. Hutchins is a clinical associate professor in the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Culture at Texas A&M University. He also currently serves as the interim co-director of the Texas A&M Education Research Center, the ERC, and as the program chair and president-elect of the Southwest Educational Research Association. His teaching and practice focus on research, evaluation, and continuous improvements in school. Dr. Hutchins remains actively involved in grant-funded projects and teaches graduate-level courses in educational research methods, including quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods, action research, program evaluation, and improvement science. And Dr. Kogut is an associate professor in the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Culture at Texas A&M. And prior to joining TLAC, she worked in the Texas A&M University libraries, supporting and collaborating with education researchers on finding and evaluating scholarly information. She is vice chair of the Associate of College and Research Libraries, Education and Behavior Sciences section, and her current research projects focus on evidence synthesis methods in education and how pre-service teachers evaluate online sources. So having said that, I will pass it over to Dr. Hutchins and Dr. Kogut now. Again, we're so excited to have you both here with us today, and I will go ahead and let you both share your slides.
All right, well, thank you for the introduction. It's a privilege to be here today, speaking with all of you and also presenting with Dr. Kogut. Next slide, please. So today's purpose, so here we're going to highlight some processes for finding articles on a topic. And this is a little bit in contrast to what might be thought of as literature review as a research method, but more commonly thought of as systematic review or research synthesis. So again, we're kind of highlighting sort of how you might find articles on your topic. Today's learning objectives, we're going to practice some techniques to help you plan your searches. We're going to help work on performing some literature searches using an academic database. And we'll also do some comparisons of database searching to other common methods such as Google Scholar and AI. Next slide, please. All right, so planning your search. I think we have a little quick poll we'd like to do. Christina, if you could please drop that in the chat. And so for this poll, we're just trying to get a little bit of feedback on the resources that you use to help get started identifying keywords. All right, looks like we still have a few votes coming in, but with about half of the attendees casting their vote, we're seeing it's a pretty even split between Internet Search and Google Scholar as the top two resources used to identify keywords, followed by academic databases, and then last, use of AI and peers. So all good options. Today we're going to talk about probably the least scholarly one to start with in terms of using an internet search just to get started with your keywords. So we could go back over to the slides. All right, so before we start actually identifying what our keywords are, it can be helpful to plan to use a framework to really help structure and organize how you're referring to your topic. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about the PCP framework, which includes your population, your context, and the phenomenon of interest. So in here in the PCP framework, your population focuses on who you are interested in. The context is what is the setting, and the phenomenon of interest is the thing that you're interested in. So for example, we might be interested in 8th graders in science classrooms doing project-based learning. So here the population is 8th graders, the context is science, and our phenomenon of interest is project-based learning. Next slide, please. And one of the ways to help organize your search phrases using this framework is put it in a table. And the table here, I've highlighted those 3 terms we just worked an example. So we can see our population is 8th graders, our setting is science, and our phenomenon is project-based learning. Now in the leftmost column, that's where we put our PCP framework, so population, setting, and phenomenon. But you'll see that we've also organized some other table headings in terms of the breadth of our phrases. So for example, population, the broadest phrase that we might use to capture information on 8th graders is secondary school. However, that's also going to give us some information on high school, middle school, and intermediate school if it's available. Some of the narrowest phrases that we can use would be 8th grade or 8th graders, where the 8th is either spelled out or used in numerical form. Next slide, please. So just to speak a little bit more about broader versus narrower phrases. So in the example we just talked about with secondary school versus 8th graders, we can see that some phrases really kind of refer to these broad umbrella-like topics. So in addition to secondary, we also see science is a similar broad phrase. However, other phrases refer to very narrow or specific topics. So you can search for science and capture everything that falls under the science context, or you could limit it to just earth science and really narrow in on just literature that might be available there, science. And what's kind of interesting with framing broader versus narrower terms is you can start to think of these informally in terms of hierarchies and synonyms. So hierarchies are related phrases that are organized by level of breadth. And what this does is it creates a nesting of narrower phrases. So for example, secondary school at the broadest level, then intermediate school or middle school as kind of your intermediate level, and then the narrowest phrases being 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, or 8th grade. And so depending on sort of how you implement these different keywords, you're going to identify different, potentially identify different articles. And so then you can also see that within phrases of the same breadth, you're essentially creating what are effectively synonyms. So synonyms are related phrases that mean the same or similar things. So for example, we already covered 8th grade or 8th grade where it's spelled out or used numerically. But we might also see similar things in terms of student-centered or learner-centered as being similar phrases that mean the same thing. Next slide, please. So where do you start in terms of identifying keywords? So this is sometimes something that gives people a little pause, because it's like I was told to avoid the internet when it comes to anything scholarly. But it can be a great place to just get started. And what do I mean by getting started? So at this point, we really need to understand what keywords we're going to start plugging into an academic database once we get there. And a quick internet search can be a great place just to identify the language that others are using to describe your topic. One of the strategies I like to use is just type in, what is project-based learning, or what is student engagement? And just to see sort of how it's described. And so I've pulled in some example search results that were produced from a Google search from what is project-based learning. And you can see in the first one, it's commonly referred to with an acronym, PBL. You can also see that it's being described as a derivative of inquiry-based learning. So even in this first sense, we're getting 2 different phrases that we might use in reference to project-based learning. And in this one, it's already even applying a hierarchy where project-based learning would come somewhere underneath inquiry-based learning. We're also seeing that it's an aspect of active learning. We're seeing that project-based learning is an instructional method. We're seeing language such as project-based learning as student-centered approach. We're also seeing that it's a learner-centered approach. We're seeing that project-based learning is often confused with problem-based learning. So here's even an example of what project-based learning is not. So that can be helpful too. Not only are we getting some example starting points for phrases we can use, not only in terms of a hierarchy of terms and some synonyms, but we're also seeing some potential antonyms, some things that we want to exclude from our searches. So then up in the top right-hand corner, I've kind of pulled some of these in where we can see we might start to compile a list of keywords such as project-based learning, PBL, or project-based instruction. We can say that just as a starting point, it's not problem-based learning, that it's an instructional or teaching method, that it's related to student-centered or learner-centered approaches, that it involves active learning, and it involves inquiry-based learning. Next slide, please. So if we go back to our table and we start plugging in some of these terms, we're kind of guesstimating where some of these phrases might fall. We kind of already worked out the population ranging from secondary school all the way down to 8th graders from our interest area, and provided an example. We might see science at the broadest level and earth science at the narrowest. But here we pulled in a lot of good information about our phenomenon of interest. And so this is just again, the starting point, but we've kind of pulled in and said, okay, well, it seems like some of our broader phrases might be active learning, student-centered pedagogy, student-centered instruction, learner-centered instruction. Kind of hedging my bets that maybe somewhere in the middle, we're seeing inquiry-based learning. And then some of the narrowest phrases would be project-based learning, PBL, or project-based instruction. And again, really making sure that we're excluding problem-based learning if we are specifically going for articles related to project-based but not problem-based. And so this really is a way to set yourself up as a starting point. Again, we've just sort of done a quick internet search to say, what language are others using to describe my topic? And using that to just compile a list of terms that we might use as a beginning place to start working in a more formal and scholarly academic database. So from there, I'm going to pass things over.
Thank you, Dr. Hutchins. So now we're gonna transition from the initial brainstorming and thinking about our keywords to the actual searching in the academic database. So Christina, if you could put the second poll question in, please. So we have a poll. Where now that you're starting to look for articles, do you go? Seems like a lot of people voted quickly, but I also see we have 61 participants in Zoom, so let's wait another couple of seconds for other people to get in their responses. Maybe someone wants to break the tie between Google Scholar and academic databases. Okay. Yeah, so typically, when we start looking for articles, I think two of the primary places we start are either Google Scholar or academic databases. And y'all seem pretty split evenly about whether the Google Scholar is the first place or you go directly to an academic database. And so let me switch back to the slide. And so today we're going to focus on academic databases, but I want to start with a quick comparison of Google Scholar versus an academic database. We all have kind of the same sense of what the difference is, because Google Scholar can be a great starting point. I don't want to say never use Google Scholar, but the primary differences are going to be in how Google Scholar gets its information. So Google does web crawls and indexes papers that it can find on websites. So it can only index a paper if it has the free access to an abstract or the full. And when we search Google Scholar, we all know that it does a pretty good job of giving us things that are relevant right away, right? In the first page of search results, and I'm not going to ask you how many people actually go past the first page, but in the first page of search results, we usually get some things that are like, oh, that's on my topic, which is great to get started, but sometimes can be a little frustrating when we have a whole lot of information that we have to sift through, and we have limitations on how we can limit those articles that Google Scholar gives us. We can limit results by date, but we can't like sort by date and say, hey, only show me like the most recent to the oldest. Whereas when we get to academic databases, usually we can pick a database that's very focused on our subject or discipline. So if you're in education, ERIC is usually a go-to. If you're in educational psychology or something with psychology, we have APA PsycInfo. Probably also heard a lot about Web of Science, which is multidisciplinary. But what that allows us to do is then focus our search on things that are using keywords related to our topic in our disciplinary language versus what Google Scholar does, which is kind of everything, every topic. And rather than indexing, the way databases index is they have a set list of journals that are related to education or related to psychology, and they index every paper in that journal. It doesn't use web crawling, it's via partnerships and contacts with publishers about journal data that they're going to get. Academic databases, what I like about them is they're designed to provide you different ways to allow for information retrieval. So I think Google Scholar has like one option for any type of article, review article. And then when we get to databases, we'll see things like we can limit to peer reviewed, we can limit to subject terms, just to give you a sense of two different records. On the top here, we have the Google Scholar record. So we'll see, we have the title, we have authors, we have the journal. It's actually pulling from the ERIC database, and then we have the abstract. So those are all great things that in our Google Scholar search we're able to search. But then we look at the ERIC database record just as a comparison. We see the authors, we see the source. We'll see that under peer reviewed, there's a Y, meaning that they've marked this record as it's from a peer reviewed journal. We'll see descriptors. So these are things that the database applies to every record to facilitate you retrieving information. They're sort of like Twitter or X hashtags where, you know, hashtag science instruction, you can search for that and bring together everything that's tagged science instruction. So again, things that help you kind of retrieve versus just keyword searching in a box. Location identifiers, it'll put country if we're in the United States, sometimes it'll put metropolitan area or state. Education level for anyone doing education research is always very helpful if you're looking at particular grade levels, particular schools, college versus high school versus K-12, and then publications. So you can see here, just in an example database record versus Google Scholar, the database is giving us these different ways that we can actually get at the articles and make our search a little bit more specific. So now to refining our search terms. So Dr. Hutchins talks a lot about that initial planning of the search. And why that's very important is because academic databases use your keywords and rely on your keywords to retrieve articles. So while Google Scholar kind of does some stuff in the background and helps kind of expand out your search, a lot of databases don't do that. So we have to be a little bit more strategic in thinking about our systems that we're going to use. So we look, I've taken the table Dr. Hutchins has shown us, and let's start just with this idea of project-based learning. Like Dr. Hutchins showed us going to the internet. And to investigate this, I'm going to go to the ERIC database. So I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so the library homepage and databases, and then ERIC. Make that a little bigger. And so really what I'm trying to do here is kind of get a sense of, now that I've explored this topic via an internet search, how are scholarly articles using this phrase? So one way to start is I simply type in project-based learning, and I see sorry, trying to multitask. I sometimes can't do that. I'll answer that question in a second, Dr. Irby. So I see project-based learning does come up as an autocomplete, which sometimes is great because it gives you a sense that these are terms that are being used in this database. Sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're not. And sometimes I've noticed there's even that they misspellings. So just keep an eye out for that. And yes, this is the version of ERIC that is through Texas A&M University. There is another version of ERIC that is freely available online through the U.S. Department of Education. So anyone with internet access has access to a version of ERIC. So I want to make that clear. But what we're doing is, kind of checking to see, where is our term coming up? Is it coming up in the title? So right here, I see project-based learning. I'm seeing project-based learning in the second title. So it looks like project-based learning is used in the title. Something else I like to check is subject terms. Is there a subject term for project-based learning? And I will say I am not seeing this. I see student projects and I see active learning. And I'm seeing student projects and active learning pretty much on every article, which is kind of telling me, hey, these subjects are probably applicable to the idea of project-based learning. So maybe I want to investigate them a little further. And if you like lists, if you go into that detailed record, you can see a list of all the subject terms. But in doing this, I'm just kind of thinking through, again, my keywords. And I can also start looking at education levels. Because remember our example, we were looking for middle schools or junior high schools or grade 7. So you can start getting a sense of how the database, where these terms are coming up. So subject terms are awesome. So active learning student projects we've seen on multiple records. So let's go up to what is called the thesaurus, because this thesaurus is going to be the conglomeration of all the subject terms that are used in the ERIC database. So for example, if I just type in project-based learning, I can see that ERIC actually, instead of using the term project-based learning to tag records, uses active learning or student projects. So I can click, these are all active links. I can click on active learning and get a note about how active learning is used. We see it's used for project-based learning, and then we get a list of broader terms and then related terms, which sometimes these are very helpful depending on your topic, and other times they are not that helpful at all. So I just give this to you as an idea of ways to kind of go and continue to refine and think through your strategies. So, if I'm thinking back to my table, then we already have active learning, but maybe I want to go back and add in that idea of student projects as a broader phrase or an intermediate phrase. So that's refining our search terms in a database. And I have extra slides that we don't use. So hopefully. So now the fun part is connecting all of those search terms in a database, because like Google Scholar, it has the one search box, right? And we can put everything into that search box. We can use and or. But in the database, it is actually going to be very important to use the ands and ors, and I have exact phrases on here to make sure the database knows what you're looking for. So we want and between all of the concepts that we want in every record. So in our example, we want something related to middle school, we want something related to project-based learning, and we want something related to science. So we would use and between all of those. If we're looking at our population, we have middle school or junior high or 6th grade or 7th grade or 8th grade. We're okay with any of those coming up in our search, so we'd want to use or between. Databases also kind of like to help you out. So if you want to make sure that you're searching that exact phrase middle school or that exact phrase junior high or that exact phrase project-based learning, you do want to make sure that you use the quotation marks, because then it'll search for the exact phrase. Google Scholar, I'll say, does the same thing. You can search for exact phrases in Google Scholar and in Google. So let's go back to our search and let's put in our search strategy. So, if we're doing an ERIC search, we can put in middle school. And then I like to type in or in uppercase, just because I like to be able to find it easier to read. It is not required that it be in uppercase. 6th grade or 7th grade or 8th grade. And so each concept gets its own box. So you see here and is already defaulted. I usually just leave these defaulted unless you're very good at Boolean logic. Sometimes it gets a little confusing when you start using ors here as and. So each concept in its own box. Our grade level, project-based learning, or we could do PBL, that abbreviation. And then finally, we wanted something to do with that. So let's go ahead and I'm going to hit search. You can see that our results, we have 200. And so one thing I do want to note is here, I didn't select a field. I left this optional. And that is the broadest database searching you can do in any of the EBSCO interface databases, which all kind of look the same. So this searches pretty much every field where there's text, like title and subject terms and education level and abstract. But one way to further refine your search is if you're looking at the results and you're seeing, well, project-based learning is coming up in the title. And this one's problem-based learning, and I don't really want problem-based learning. So maybe I'm going to limit project-based learning or PBL to just the title field. We can do the same thing You can limit to abstracts. You can limit to journal name if you only want articles from a particular journal. The database interface kind of makes that easy for you. And then on the left-hand side, to further refine, the former librarian in me never clicked to full text. I know it's tempting, never click that. If you're at Texas A&M, we have access to a whole lot of journals that, while there might not be immediate full text available, these find text at TAMO links will link you to the full text. So you're kind of just hurting yourself if you limit to full text. But unlike Google Scholar, there's a academic peer-reviewed journal. You can limit to that if you only want those journals that have been marked peer-reviewed in the record. Their source site. So here, because we limited to academic peer-reviewed journals, only seeing academic journals in their source. You can also limit by language, or if you're actually interested in a particular geographic region. You know, sometimes people only want United States, or they're doing research on foreign countries. If those were tagged in the record, like here's 3 articles that were tagged Texas, and so we can look at and further refine to limit to this. So that is kind of my overview of literature searching. But the point being that the idea is once you do one search, you can continue to refine and use the results to make modifications to your search and kind of change things. One of the things I see a lot is like we put in a search and it's like, oh, well, this is this. But coming up here, kind of modifying, say, maybe I don't want PBL because that also stands for problem-based learning. So I don't want to be that, I don't want things that have problem-based learning. I just want project-based learning, changing things to abstract, kind of taking out words, being more specific in our population. So that whole idea of making the keywords work for you, because that's how the database is going to search and find articles that are relevant to your topic that you're going to need to then work and write your paper. Get back to the PowerPoint slides for kind of our last slide, because I feel like this idea of AI and literature searching is everywhere. And so, you know, the elephant in the room, I don't want to just gloss over it. But like I've emphasized, traditional databases are using keywords to try to find articles for you. When we start looking at these AI-powered tools, they're using different natural language processing models to retrieve results. So they can do some of you put in a phrase, problem-based, project-based learning. They can kind of take what is usually described as problem-based learning and use their models to kind of expand out for you. One of the kind of drawbacks that I'm finding right now is if we want to just find all the articles on a topic, a lot of these programs, Elicit, Consensus, or the site, they help you identify papers, but they also want to just summarize those papers for you, rather than allowing you as the researcher to make your own decisions on the merit of the paper. And so I think Consensus is really one of the only ones that's like, oh, you can search via keywords and find articles. So kind of keeping that in mind is what these are right now designed to do. I do want to point out that Elicit, Perplexity, and Consensus are based on a scholarly database. So they are searching scholarly articles, and a lot of them you can see. And then there's other tools which, once you have a set of articles or a good article, you can use that as kind of a start to then find more papers related. And those are Research Rabbit and Connected Papers. You kind of put in your great paper, and then they help you find things. So we're not going to get into a lot. I just wanted to acknowledge that this is out there, and it searches differently. Some of the limitations to keep in mind are these. Most of these have a free version that's kind of limited. And then once you hit a certain point, or you want more advanced features or more accurate features, there's often a fee involved in getting the most accurate results. And keeping in mind what you're actually searching, because some of the programs don't have access to the full text of articles. So when they give you a summary, rather than looking at the full text, they're actually only using the abstract of the article, which is the summary anyway. And ultimately, for me personally, I think they're very useful in conjunction with academic database finding or trying to find articles on a very specific topic. But there's your AI slide, and my current thoughts on AI. Anyone else is welcome to share. I don't think right now I'm biased. I like the literature databases. I like the way that I can control how the search works and the keywords. So with that, thank you all for joining Dr. Hutchins and myself today. And we have about 10 minutes for questions. And I think I can go ahead and stop sharing. And
Thank you, Dr. Kogut. So I've been monitoring the chat. We had a few questions come in there. I think some of the earlier ones have already been addressed in terms of access to ERIC, the public version versus what's available through the university. An additional question has come through about getting the citation information. One of the participants dropped the link to clicking on the magnifying icon and getting the APA or MLA version of the citation. And then another question came in about what happens when your search terms return either too many or too few results. We stepped through some examples about how to apply filters or limiters to really narrow those in. But I think when you have too few results, that's where it can be helpful to go back to your table and look at your framework and take a look at sort of your broader versus narrower terms. Sometimes if you're not seeing results, that's where you might go in and start to plug in your intermediate or broader terms to open those search results back up. So for example, in the searches we were just doing where it was middle school and a particular grade or middle school or a grade, you might start to expand out to look at the level rather than particular grades. And as you kind of increase the breadth of a search term or your search phrases within that category of the population, you're going to increase the number of results. Let's see here.
How do you save your searches as you go? I will tell you what I do. Most databases do allow you to create an account that will then you can save the search to that account. I have so many accounts that I get confused. And so what I like to do is there's search history where you can just kind of copy and paste your search. And I put these in a Google Doc or a Word doc. So as you see, there's a search history box under here. And if I can expand that out, I literally just take this and copy it and then paste it into another document.
Could you say that again, please? Can I see that again? So I'm a non-traditional.
Oh, you're good.
And so my issue's not finding the articles. It's more of because I get so many and then I go back to read them, it's where to put them, save them. And then I was the person asking about citations because that's my area of weakness. So Can you go back over that, please?
Okay, so the default for the search history is to have it hidden. So
this is the 1-minute warning message before the tardy bell rings and class begins. 1 minute.
Oops.
It's okay. You're good. So the search history link, when we expand that out, it'll show us all of the searches that we've done. And so from here, I like to just copy and paste them into a Word document, a Google document. But like I was saying, if you want to sign in up here and create an account, you're more than welcome to do that. And you can actually then save your searches to that account. When you're going through articles and you're finding ones that you like, you can always add them to a folder. That's then when you come up here to your folder, they're here for you to export or email to yourself to kind of get them to yourself. The one caveat with the folder is it does time out. So if you kind of go away and get a snack and you're gone, when you come back, they might not be in your folder. So if you create an account and you're signed into your account, you add them to your folder, they stay in your folder. You don't have that kind of issue. When you export from here, I think it's under export. No, it's not. It's under save as file. You can actually pick a citation format here to get a file with the information, the articles that you put in your folder and in that citation format. So it's, I use these databases all the time, and I still sometimes I'm like, where is this located? Does that help?
Yes, ma'am. That's so informative. I really appreciate you. And thank you, Ms. Hall, for sending us all the emails about all of this stuff.
Of
Appreciate
course.
you guys.
Yeah, this was super insightful, and I'm glad everyone was able to join us for this. I do see that we have about 3 more questions in the chat, and based on our time, I'm thinking maybe we could go through those 3 questions. That way I can make sure we get out on time, but I want to make sure we go through those. So it looks like that first one was from Uyak. I'd like to be able to save my searches in a zip file and upload to my citation manager or Covidence. How can I do that?
Yeah, and I saw that one. That's why I didn't stop my share, because when we were in any of the EBSCO databases, it's under the share menu. Export results, email a link to download exported results. This will download all of the results for your search. You enter your email address, and very important to change the file format to RIS format. Because RIS format is going to work with Covidence, it's going to work with your citation manager. And then they'll email you the zip file, and voila, you can upload it. It's awesome. I'm going to stop my share now, and we can get.
Thank you, Dr. Kogut. And then it looks like the next one, how would you recommend using a paper copy of an APA guide to check the accuracy of citation? Also, is there a software that you would recommend for citation?
I don't see Dr. Hutchins unmuting, so.
Yeah, it's a good question. If I'm understanding correctly, like how are you just comparing and contrast what you're seeing in a paper guide from what you're getting back from the automated system?
Yes, that's correct.
I think just making sure you're using a credible source, whether it's APA manual. Previously in the chat, OWL Purdue was provided as another reputable source. And just paying attention to some of the key aspects of citations from different sources that are being used. The different elements that are being included in the citation, what's being in italics, what's not, how they're including volume, page numbers, editors, and then just kind of comparing and contrasting those between the citations that you're getting and double checking some of those key elements. As far as a software goes, I'm not sure as I'm familiar. Dr. Kogut or anyone else have used software?
Yeah, I've heard a lot about EndNote. I know that one. I've heard a lot about. So I think that, and it's pretty accessible in terms of different interfaces you're using it. And then the last question, maybe we can take 30 seconds to answer this one. Do you recommend searching from primarily the academic databases, or is it better to practice diversifying the search tools?
It all depends on the purpose of your search. So I would recommend kind of starting with the academic databases. And as you get familiar with the literature and what's out there, then kind of going to some other search tools, because particularly the AI tools, it really does help if you have the understanding of the topic to make sure that what is generated and pulling for you is going to be relevant. So
Definitely.
that's how I would do that. Dr. Hutchins, if you want to chime in how you would.
No, I don't think I have anything else to add to that one. I think we
Definitely.
still have some questions coming in, but I'm afraid we might be
Yeah,
coming up on.
we are at time, but this recording will also be available on our YouTube. So if folks want to go back and be able to check out any of the information that was shared, there will be the recording. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Kogut and Dr. Hutchins. This was super informative and it sparked a lot of great discussion in the comments. So thank you. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank
you very
all.
much.